time. I've travelled to Cuba, Venezuela and Ecuador, but sadly not Bolivia. I'd like to welcome you though this evening to this meeting on Bolivia, building solidarity following yesterday's historic presidential election there. I remember chairing the massive Friends of Bolivia event against the coup against Evo Morales last November, and it's great to be chairing the event this evening following the totally contrasting news we've had today of the Bolivian people rejecting the coup regime and supporting the movement for socialism at the polls. So today is a day of celebration, but of course also a day of vigilance. We stand with all of those struggling for democracy, social progress and self-determination in Bolivia and salute their victory at the polls. The US government and the UK government must respect the will of the Bolivian people, and we must continue to build links and solidarity. You'll be hearing from a range of speakers this evening, and we are pleased to be joined by so many of you, not only on Zoom, but also streaming on YouTube and Facebook. As well as getting the latest, including eyewitness and Bolivian accounts, we will also be finding out why international solidarity is important, including in terms of maintaining vigilance against any threat of coup, a further coup, or external intervention. Can I just make the point that later in the meeting, if you wish to hear the translation for Patricia Bolivian from Spanish to English, please at the time select the English channel at the bottom of the Zoom panel in translation options. In the chat, links will be posted by our volunteers about how you can follow Friends of Bolivia and show your support. And just before we move on to our first speaker, I'll just remind you that if you are tweeting tonight, the hashtag is hashtag Bolivia Victory, uppercase B and uppercase V. So to start our meeting, I'm very, very pleased to welcome and introduce a great friend of mine, Kate Hudson, CND General Secretary and a founding supporter of Friends of Bolivia. Kate.
Thanks very much, Adrian. And it's such a joy to bring greetings from CND to this meeting this evening. And congratulations to the Bolivian people on this amazing victory. And of course, it's a victory of really, truly global significance. And above all, it's a definitive first round victory. And that just really underlines the significance of this restoration of democracy. There can be no doubt about the scale of the victory. And as the president-elect says, we have recovered democracy and hope. And I think that this victory gives hope to us all. And he's assured the people that he says we will restore unity in our country and we will recover the economy step by step. So it's a complete defeat for the neoliberal coup, which we saw almost a year ago. And the so-called interim president, Agnes, in other words, self-appointed president as she was put in place by the coup. She's acknowledged the victory of mass as well. And in fact, she'd withdrawn from the presidential race only last month to try and consolidate the right-wing votes and prevent a mass victory. That strategy absolutely failed. And so she's had no alternative to recognize the scale of the victory. So this is a great day for Bolivia. There's much celebration, but of course, the question on everyone's mind is, what will the US do? Now, it looks likely that in the short term, they will have to accept the result because they've been so involved in Bolivian institutions and processes during the coup regime that they could hardly claim the elections to be fraudulent. So they're a bit stuck. And in fact, in the last few days, they've clearly stated their intention to work with whoever is elected. I read the transcript of a high-level State Department briefing last Thursday, and officials were insisting that they were open to working with whoever wins the election. And they reinforced Pompeo's position from last week too. He said, "We look forward to working with whomever the Bolivian people freely and fairly choose as the president to promote democracy, human rights and prosperity for Bolivia and for the wider region." So I think in the short term, they won't take any dramatic steps, and I hope I'm not proved wrong. It's never good to make predictions, but I think the greater concern is for the medium term, because we can be sure that the US is not going to be celebrating this victory, and they will already be planning for how to undermine it. And of course, everyone on this call, I'm sure, knows that the US has a long history of intervention in Latin America, political, economic and military, from the invasion of Mexico in 1846 right through to recent events. Many of us have seen the backing for coups in Venezuela in 2002, Honduras a few years later, through to the intervention in Bolivia last November. And that's not to mention, of course, the ongoing political intervention in Venezuela, Trump's role in recognizing Guaido as the so-called interim president. And of course, so many other countries have fallen in behind that, including our own. Of course, there's the terrible impact of economic sanctions on the Venezuelan people, not to mention the long-running economic blockade of Cuba. We've seen lawfare in Brazil against Lula and Rousseff, leading directly to the presidency of far-right Bolsonaro. And what a disaster that is on absolutely every level. But what we've seen today in Bolivia is that people can defeat US intervention. When the people are united, they can defeat the intervention. They have, in their majority, spoken up for democracy and justice in Bolivia. So that victory must be maintained, it must be strengthened, and it must be extended to all those countries fighting for their sovereignty, for their right to choose their own political and economic model. So our role is to help prevent US intervention, whatever form it takes, to expose the lies, the malpractice that undermines popular democracy. And of course, particularly from the peace movement, the role of the peace movement today must be to identify and expose any moves towards military intervention in Latin America. And we will indeed play our part. Solidarity. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kate. And a great contribution that really shows how the peace movement is in lockstep with democratic movements across the globe, particularly in Latin America. Thanks again. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Chris Hazard. Chris is the Sinn Féin MP, the MP for South Down, and I'll call him to speak now. Chris.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Good evening, everybody, and thanks to the organisers, Friends of Bolivia, for the invite to participate here this evening. Everybody else, it's been an enthralling few weeks. It's been an exciting day, and fair play to everybody who's played a part in this historic victory, great or small. I'm delighted to be here tonight to extend solidarity greetings on behalf of Sinn Féin. I'm delighted to say our various WhatsApp groups and social media feeds have been alive with messages of solidarity over the weekend, and of course throughout the many hours of today. But most importantly, I'm delighted to be able to be here tonight after many weeks and months of wondering what the future of mass and the future of parliamentary sovereignty would be in Bolivia. To see such a resounding victory yesterday in the polls in Bolivia, it's great to be here and to extend solidarity. I think the significance of this victory for democratic sovereignty cannot be overstated. I think when you bear in mind that such a large mandate was secured from within the brutal and hostile grip of an imperialist coup, it's astonishing that mass mobilised such an historic victory not merely in the presidential election, but both houses of the Bolivian parliament also. I think it's also important at the outset here this evening to remember those who have been killed by the coup in recent times, those who were massacred at Sincada, Caracara and Montero, amongst the many others. I think one of the most important tasks for the international community now in the time ahead is to ensure the henchmen of the coup do not disappear into the shadows, as if they didn't wage a brutal and illegal assault on trade unions and the indigenous community and the masses in general over the last year. They should and they ought to face justice for their crimes. I was reflecting today that in the recent weeks, the left across Europe and further afield in the Americas have been reflecting on the legacy of Allende's popular government. And also, I think we will now be looking at Morales and Mas and the lessons of this latest return to power. I think for me, we can see the enduring strength and power and never abandoning the struggle. It would have been easy to lose all hope after the coup last year, but Bolivia and the Bolivian people have shown once again that it only ever seems impossible until it is done. So, I think we need to reflect upon that in the days ahead and the time ahead. But for me, the most powerful example that we can glean from Bolivia in the recent days is the importance of genuine grassroots organization and political education. I think this was so beautifully illustrated in a recent report by Ollie Vargas from Cochabamba, and I think it's one that really needs to be learned by the left, and it's worth reflecting on here this evening. When you look at the devastating consequences of Thatcherism for working class communities throughout Britain and the north of Ireland, it left many deep social scars. This economic dislocation and sense of hopelessness led to stagnation of working class and progressive political education, and activism was often forgotten about in many of these strongholds. But as Mas has proven in recent days, indeed as Allende's popular unity previously demonstrated, we need to explore the potential now for collaboration between all of our movements on political education and the developments of real, genuine grassroots activism in an ever-changing world. It was that activism, it was that solidarity between the campesino unions, the peasants, the miners, the ordinary people of Bolivia that sealed this win. It was demonstrated on the streets of La Paz and El Alto in recent days, and there's no substitute for developing cadres of grassroots activists engaged in political education and emancipation, rather simply falling back on social media slogans that don't resonate with the real lived experiences of our communities. I think that's a huge lesson that we need to take from Bolivia at this time. And huge thanks and gratitude must be shown to Mas for showing us the way, and we need to do that. Although that's not to get away from the fact, and Kate has touched upon this, there are huge challenges now for Mas in the time ahead. It's going to be a massive job of work to undo the economic and social vandalism of the last number of months. Can these wholesale privatizations be undone? Can the reactionary forces within the military and social elite be managed and dismantled? Undoubtedly the imperialist forces will return once again. Our job in the international community is to do whatever we can now to facilitate increased solidarity, to ensure that the corporate media, for example, are not given free rein to wage the type of hybrid warfare that we've witnessed in recent years. We need to consistently challenge and prevent the normalization of Western intervention. Kate touched upon the example of Venezuela. We have seen the sickening normalization of the suffocating sanctions and illegal embargoes, and we need to stand up and fight against the physical invasions that are often touted. For our part, and in this task, Sinn Féin look forward to continuing to work with comrades right across Europe and further afield in the time ahead. And just to finish this evening, Adrian, Evo Morales pledged that the Mas would return dignity and freedom to the people of Bolivia. That they did, and how fantastic it is now that Evo himself has the freedom to return home.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. The voice of Sinn Féin there, obviously expressing sentiments from across the whole of Ireland. The point that you made, Chris, I think mustn't be forgotten. We just mustn't gloss over the assaults that have taken place on the social movements, the indigenous movement, the lethal assaults took place, and on the trade union movement as well. And let's hope in that great big task you set out in front of the incoming government, that they are able to properly police that as well. Our next speaker is Matt Wilgris, the organizer of one of the organisers of tonight's meeting, who's just going to say a few words about Friends of Bolivia. Matt.
Thank you, Adrian. And I'm trying something new out now, which is we're streaming for the first time for one of these events, Friends of Bolivia events. We're streaming on Twitter as well. In the chat box, I'm about to put up the link to people to watch it on Twitter. If you have Twitter on your phone and you can retweet that link, I'm going to see how much we can get it up from. Of course, this might not work still. And see how many we can get it up from and see if we really have grasped this new technology. Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Chris and Kate, and thank you, Patricia, for joining us, and Richard, I can see on the call, and Jeremy as well. I won't speak for very long at all. I just wanted to say that we were very proud to set up Friends of Bolivia as a sort of originally as part of Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, and then as a separate solidarity campaign. And obviously we didn't expect our first activity to be campaigning against the coup, but it's amazing now to campaign in solidarity, this victory for democracy and socialism. If you're not involved with Friends of Bolivia until today, and I can see we've over 1,000 people tuned in through Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Zoom. If you don't follow us already, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Bolivia Friends. If you're on the Labour Party, please also follow Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America at the links given. And just to say, there'll be a new solidarity statement and model motion being emailed out this week from Friends of Bolivia. So please keep an eye on that for your trade unions and other groups, and please keep in touch with us. Two other quick things. One is a different Latin America solidarity event of great interest. It's Jeremy Corbyn and Rafael Correa in conversation about the US and Latin America. That's on November the 5th, so just 2 days after the US presidential elections. And then finally, and people who are regulars at our meeting would have seen me do this a lot of times, but obviously we're not in a hall, but it still costs us a lot of money to put on Zoom webinars for our email list and so on. We're all volunteers at Friends of Bolivia, but please do use that donate link in the chat, just been posted in the chat, and give us a few pounds, maybe like if everyone in this call gives us £5, it would totally transform the work Friends of Bolivia is able to do. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks very much, Matt, and I'm sure your appeal won't go unresponded to. Our next speaker is someone I've known in London for a long time, very active in Latin American politics in London and active in the Bolivian community in London. It's Javier Sanchez. Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I would like to begin with a happy note. As the whole world know, we won the election, and it was very, very hard for us to live within 1 year of disaster, misery, poverty, intimidation, persecution, and everything that comes with this coup d'etat. So that is my first in saying that I'm very, very happy that we recovered democracy. Now, in the 14 years that the Mass Party have run the country, we have progress, we have development, we've been recognized in the world as a nation that emerges without any influence from the United States. We demonstrated that a socialist government could do the same and even better than any country that is under US government, under capitalism. So there was the situation that Bolivia became the leader in economics. Economically, it was the leader in the region, recognized by the World Bank, by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and it was recognized internationally even by the local business people. Of course, the United States didn't like that because that was a bad influence in the region. Therefore, they had to implement something that is to disaccreditate the government. And Evo Morales began to be persecuted in many, many different ways. There were a few attempts to assassinate him, once in the Titicaca Lake, where they planned to have some, I believe, he was to be by shooting him at long distances, probably a sniper. That was foiled. And the second attempt, the whole world knows, when Evo Morales came back from Russia from a meeting of about gas or something like that, and then he was refused. His plane was refused to land for refueling in many different countries. The idea was that the plane could crash in the ocean, and so that was the idea, and that didn't work anyway. So there have been many attempts, because the United States didn't like, obviously, a bad influence in the region. But what the United States doesn't know, and they will never, ever, ever know, they don't understand, is our culture. Our culture is so strong that it's embedded. It's embedded in our souls, in our veins, in our blood. But of course, the United States don't understand that. They go for the practical, commercial views, things, and that's what they are interested. And what hurts most people is our culture. It doesn't mean religion. It doesn't mean religion. People can be religious. Evo Morales was very, very open about that. And but people in the Bolivian society, we've been indoctrinated that the people from abroad always are good and better, and we should be treated as lower class, that we are limited in knowledge, limited in capacity, and so it's been always an indoctrination. But when Evo Morales came, it opened like a genius bottle, and then we realized that this is not true. Even people before, they knew that, but people were suppressed. In one thing that is very, very, very strong in Bolivia is the indigenous people. The indigenous people always being segregated, intimidated, and so say, when these fascists came in, it was nothing new. The indigenous people were very, very experienced, suffering from that kind of thing for centuries. It was nothing new. And they know, and they knew how to handle it. The indigenous people in Bolivia, we knocked down few governments. So it was nothing new. And one thing that is very, very interesting in Bolivia is something called the aylus. The aylus, they are some kind of small, very small communities. It's like small syndicates for local people, very little villages. They communicate with different communities, and they arrange things, not in the political way, probably in a way it is, but the most important thing is the survival, the community, the partnership, the friendship, and the progress for the communities. And that is a very, very strong thing that they have. Obviously, people outside don't understand that. They believe that one rule, one order from a law or something like that will be understood and obeyed. No. People in the communities, in the indigenous communities, they know how to survive. And recently, when the COVID-19 was around, what they did is their products from the low countries, from the valleys where they produce oranges, apples, they produce all the products from the tropical lands. They bring themselves to trade with the highlands, where they produce potatoes, all the products. There was a trade, and that's been happening for centuries. They are experts on trading, but of course, in the cities, they don't know that. They expect to go to the supermarkets, and the supermarket is where they buy, and that's how they survive for their food. But they are so ignorant in many basic things in Bolivia that they assume but putting rules, and of course they have to get some clowns that they have to obey the orders. One of them, the masters, is the CIA, the IMF, the World Bank, and all of them. So, but at the moment, Bolivia is happy, and we are happy that we recovered our dignity. But the worries are that we be infiltrated, we will become the third target of the United States, like Cuba and Venezuela. So that's what it is at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Javier. And I'm sure that in different non-COVID times, you'd be joining the Bolivian community here in London at great celebrations this evening. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for COVID anyway, but it's a tragedy that you're not able to have the celebrations this evening. Our next speaker is Ollie Vargas, who's a journalist in Bolivia and able to give us a first-hand account of the lead up and yesterday's polling day. Ollie.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I just want to say, first of all, thanks to all the organisers, all the speakers for helping shine a light on Bolivia at an international level. I think the whole world has been bowled over by the magnitude of the victory, by the way in which a population, millions of people who are part of trade unions, social movements, who had nothing, who didn't have weapons, didn't have funding from any state or any big backers, just had the organization that they have in their workplaces, in their communities. Just with that, they were able to defeat some of the most powerful people in the world. They were able to defeat the most powerful force in the world, which is the United States government and the puppet regime that Donald Trump had installed in Bolivia for just under a year. So I think what happened in Bolivia is something that I hope can give inspiration at a Latin American level and at a global level. It shows that if people organize in such a way, you can overcome the most difficult circumstances. I think social movements in every country in the world will go through periods where it feels like there's no hope, where it feels like the enemy, the state, the establishment is just too powerful, and there's no way that ordinary people can possibly win. But I think Bolivia shows the indigenous people, rural areas, working class people in urban districts with nothing but their own organization were able to defeat these titans. Were able to defeat a regime that had the backing of the military, the police, the United States government. So I hope that can inspire people that another world is always possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. We have to remember that the social movements in Bolivia have been through hell and back, have been massacred, jailed, tortured, disappeared. And even in those circumstances, people still manage to pull through and, more importantly, manage to win. And part of that is because the Bolivian social movements, the left in Bolivia, have always had a vision in which they've always known that the left can only win, that the people can only win and take power and maintain power by combining the social struggle, union struggle, with the political and electoral struggle. The one without the other doesn't work. Throughout Bolivia's history, and the history of every other country in the world, there's been numerous left-wing parties, many with very good politics. It could be socialist parties, communist parties, Marxist parties. But having the correct line or the correct ideas alone is not basis upon which you can win the country and take power and govern on behalf of the majority of the people. What you need is first to build organization on the ground, grassroots organization, in communities, in workplaces. And then once that has reached a certain level of maturity, a certain level of preparedness, to then move into the political struggle and the social struggle. I don't think this victory would have definitely wouldn't have been possible if the movement towards socialism, Evo Morales' party, was just a progressive left-wing party like so many around the world. If that were the case, then the whole party would have disappeared with the persecution of its leaders. Evo Morales has been exiled. The presidential candidate Luis Arce has how many? I think 5 different criminal charges hanging over him. The most famous candidates of the parties at the Senate level, people like Andrónico Rodriguez, Leonardo Losa, Patricia Arce, have 15, 16 criminal charges each. They've been persecuted from day one. If the movement towards socialism was a political party of big left-wing personalities, individuals, the whole thing would have fallen apart with the persecution. But the reason the movement towards socialism was able to win yesterday, throughout this whole year, to struggle and then win, was because it has a presence across the whole country, in every rural community, in every working class community, in so many workplaces right across the country. And however much you persecute one person, two people, 10 people, 20 people, you can't put a lid on a movement that exists in every region of the country, that exists in every community in which people feel identified with. You can never put a lid on that. And that's how the movement towards socialism was able to win. And I hope that the lessons of that victory can be taken by left-wing parties, social movements all around the world, because there's nothing special about Bolivians, Bolivian people, Bolivian culture. There's nothing intrinsic that makes these sorts of victories and organization possible. In fact, much of Bolivia's history, certainly throughout the 20th century, has been a very devastating defeat, of being massacred, tortured, and crushed, despite the will and the organization that has always existed. So it's something that can be adopted anywhere in the world. And I think the challenges that are coming are numerous. They're daunting. First, there has to be justice for the massacres, for the persecution that Bolivians have suffered over the past year. And then probably the most important task that this government has, or certainly the most important task this government has, is rebuilding the economy. Bolivia, since the coup, has fallen into a total economic collapse thanks to neoliberal reforms. They've cancelled the state development projects that were built up under Evo Morales. They've privatized numerous state industries, and now the economy is in freefall. The most recent figures show that the economy has contracted over 11%. People were locked away during the pandemic with no income support, were left to starve in their homes. So rebuilding that is going to be an enormous task, but it's been done before. When Carlos Mesa, the current neoliberal candidate, he was president in 2005 and he was overthrown. Evo came in afterwards. When Carlos Mesa was overthrown, the state was bankrupt. Carlos Mesa was taking out IMF loans to pay the salaries of public sector workers. That's a hugely economically irresponsible thing to do, to take out loans to pay your basic costs of running the state rather than for investments or things like that, the things that can provide you with economic growth in the future. But out of that destruction, out of those ashes, Evo Morales, with Luis Arce as economy minister, turned Bolivia from the region's poorest country into its fastest growing economy. And how did they achieve that? Again, there was nothing special about what they did. There's no magic formulas or secret, plans in what they did. What they did was very simple. They recognized that the only way that the state can have enough resources to provide for the needs of people, to provide infrastructure, to provide public services for people, is through the nationalization of the country's most important industries. And that's when Evo Morales nationalized natural gas, nationalized the commanding heights of the Bolivian economy. Using those profits, invest in infrastructure, that then boosts the economy. People can move around, people can do business in all sections of the country. Rural, indigenous, communities can take their products to market in the cities. And that's how poverty was halved during Evo Morales' period in government. That's how incomes, the minimum wage, those on the lowest incomes saw their incomes triple. So there's so many lessons that can be learned from Bolivia for those around the world. A lesson in how to organize, how to win in the most difficult circumstances, and also how you can build an economy that works for the majority of the people of your country and not for the interests of a few or foreign elites or a few capitalist interests. So I hope these lessons can stay with people. And yesterday was an incredibly emotional day. Obviously, as I said before, people have been through hell and back. So to see the numbers as it was yesterday, to know that this nightmare is over, is extraordinary. And yesterday was a microcosm, certainly for me at least, was a microcosm for this whole period. We started the day going with Luis Arce to go and vote, at which right-wing thugs, criminals, were shouting at us. They threw eggs at us. They're throwing water at us, threatening to fight us, verbally abusing us. We left there. We go with the president of the Senate, Eva Copa, one of the new female leaders of the MAS in Ciudad Satélite, at which an organized group of far-right criminals were waiting there, shouting out. Well, it began with shouting, then it began with assaults. I was assaulted that day when I began filming what they were shouting, sexist chants. They tried to steal my camera, my tripod. I had my credential, my press pass around my neck. They're pulling it. I was punched in the chest. But at the end of the day, we came out of it, and we can say that the country doesn't belong to those people. It doesn't belong to those violent extremists that are funded by the US, that are paid, who only came out to protest against Evo Morales because they were being paid, who only have hate in their heart, who, when they were in government, destroyed the country, left the country as the poorest country in the region. This country belongs to the social movements. This country belongs to the people who fight for equality, for democracy, for independence against US intervention. So I hope the inspiration and the hope that comes from that can be taken all around the world, to struggles all around the world. And hopefully we can see similar victories all around the world. I think today Bolivia, tomorrow we have to take Ecuador. Tomorrow democracy has to be restored to Ecuador. The Ecuadorian economy has to be rebuilt after being destroyed by IMF loans, by privatizations. And the comrade Rafael Correa has to come back to do what he did before, give the dignity to the Ecuadorian people. So I hope it can go beyond Ecuador and throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ollie. And we all owe you a great debt, really. And I've got great admiration for those who stay in the face of a coup and report it and bear witness to the world about what's going on in the face of extreme violence. And as you've explained yourself, you personally have done this at great personal risk. So thank you very much for that contribution from the heart and with emotion. Before asking Richard to speak, can I just remind everybody about Matt's appeal for his financial appeal, and you can find the details of how to donate to Friends of Bolivia in the chat. Okay, well, our next speaker is Richard Burgon MP, Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, and the Left MPs as a group have historically been great supporters of the left in Latin America, and I'm sure we're going to be very welcome what Richard has to say to us this evening. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Adrian, and thanks to Ollie and all the other fantastic speakers. It's been great to hear a first-hand account of the inspirational events in Bolivia against adversity today. So I want to start off really by paying tribute to the heroic struggle of the Bolivian people to actually force these elections to take place in the first place, and then, of course, to win those elections. It's a huge and impressive victory for the left, and it gives hope to the left and to socialists and to internationalists the world over, because these elections, as we've heard from Ollie, were won in the face of brutal repression. Since last year's coup and in the run-up to the elections, there's been widespread violence and repression against the movement towards socialism, including attempts to ban its candidates, to jail movement towards socialism and trade union and indigenous activists, and violence being forced upon them from actual fascist movements. People, make no mistake, have lost their lives in this struggle against dictatorship. And as we've heard, the scale of repression was clear even on election day itself, when the coup merchants were hanging on to power for the last few hours. There were frightening scenes of vast military presences on the streets. We should be totally clear about this. These elections were only seeded after a long general strike by trade unions in August and by a nationwide highway blockade. So a general strike and direct action helped to force these elections. So despite all the odds, despite all the oppression, despite all the brutality, despite the silence around much of the world and the grotesque praise for the coup mongers among some leading Western governments, the Bolivian people resisted. The Bolivian left showed huge bravery. Once again, they proved that democracy and equality are only ever won through struggle. They're never handed over voluntarily. So we need to learn from Bolivia, obviously apply to the different conditions in our own context. The need to keep fighting, despite setbacks and adversity. And I would say, without seeking to be too censorious to my left comrades in this country, I understand people feel despondent. I understand people feel put upon on the left in our country. But take a look at what's happened in Bolivia. That's oppression, that's struggling against the odds, and that's succeeding against the odds. So I'm sure that we can carry on to eventual victory, if they can, in Bolivia against far greater odds than we could ever imagine at this moment in our country. I want to talk about the economic and political project in Latin America, because this election result shows that 2 decades after the rise of the new socialist left in Latin America, the right wing still can't win popular support for its project of privatization and neoliberalism. As Evo Morales warned it would, the coup government set about overturning many of those progressive gains achieved in the last decade in Bolivia. It plundered the collective wealth by trying to privatize the state-owned companies that Evo's government had nationalized to help grow Bolivia's economy. A decree from early this year proposed a return to the past, proposing to privatize electricity, telecommunications, and even parts of health and education. And the disastrous consequences of these approaches, these neoliberal so-called solutions, were also clear in Bolivia's appalling response to COVID under the coup government, leaving Bolivia with the highest death rates in the world and with people struggling to access food and access medicines. The simple fact is that these neoliberal policies are unpopular, and that's why the Bolivian right has had to resort to coups, to violence and to repression in Bolivia. And the anti-democratic nature of the Latin American right was also very clear in the fact that it chose as its coup president someone who branded Bolivia's indigenous majority as, to quote, satanic. In contrast, under Evo Morales, Bolivia's had its first indigenous leaders, allowing the country's long excluded indigenous majority to finally take center stage. But it's not just Bolivia, where the right can't win a popular mandate for its neoliberal agenda. That's why Lula was jailed in Brazil. That's why Correa was recently banned from standing in the elections in Ecuador that are on the way in February. When the right know it can't win in free and fair elections, it stops free and fair elections taking place. And Bolivia has also exposed the absolute lie that socialism can't be successful, because this election result doesn't just show the failures of neoliberalism, it shows the success of socialism. The record of the Morales government was extraordinary with huge social and economic leaps for the long excluded. Just look at the country's gross domestic product. It grew an average of almost 5% a year under Evo Morales, with unemployment well below the region's average. But it's also important to note that the growth was shared with the people. The percentage of the population living in poverty almost halved. Those in extreme poverty fell even further. The minimum wage went up by a factor of 5. There was huge social investment addressing the social debt of decades of colonialism and then neoliberalism, huge increases in public healthcare and education, but also electricity was brought to large numbers of rural homes, special programs that halved infant mortality were introduced, and a special payment to almost 1 million older Bolivians who otherwise would have received no pension. It's because of all of this and much more that Evo Morales won so many elections, and why the movement towards socialism won again against the odds and against the power of the elites in Bolivia, because it's socialist policies that have practically delivered for the many. So after the coup, as we know, Evo Morales took refuge in Mexico, which has at long last a left-wing government. The Mexican government acted bravely to ensure that Evo could get out of Bolivia alive, and they granted him political asylum. There is a real possibility, make no mistake, that Evo Morales could have been killed or jailed had he remained in Bolivia. Then he went to Argentina, which of course neighbours Bolivia, after the left-wing government won there last year. Argentina has been active in not only providing sanctuary, but applying pressure for the democratic wishes of the Bolivian people to be respected. And we've seen a large presence of international observers from the progressive international organisations and others, such as the leader of Brazil's Workers' Party. And that helped apply some pressure too. So obviously, as a left movement in this country, our role is more limited, but we do have to ensure that we are building a left that is interested in and committed to offering solidarity with and learning from struggles all over the world, because the struggle against capitalism is a global one. So we must provide solidarity to our comrades in Bolivia and in other countries in Latin America and around the world, but we must also have the humility to learn from them. I don't think anybody could seriously suggest that all the answers to the problems of the left could be found here in Britain. We need to listen, we need to learn, we need to have humility and learn from those who have taken state power in other countries. And we need to think maybe there's things that we can learn from them and apply to our own situations over here. And I want to finish by considering the need for us to carry on pressing for a new, truly ethical foreign policy, because in contrast, the progressive solidarity of Latin America, our governments and the governments in the United States have acted completely shamelessly in this affair. Their actions were at very best turning a blind eye towards events, and at worst helping consolidate a military-led coup government. When the coup occurred, the United States said that the ousting of Evo Morales was, to quote, a significant moment for democracy, and that the United States applauds the Bolivian military for abiding by its oath. And in the US, the Washington-dominated OAS, the Organisation of American States, they played a key role in justifying the coup by giving legs to baseless claims of fraud by Evo Morales. The OAS used a deliberately false interpretation of preliminary election results that have been widely proven as false to build a case that the ouster of Morales by the army was not a coup. And our government in this country, you won't be surprised to know, wasn't much better. It simply lapped up the false claims of the OAS, and in its official statement, the UK government congratulated the coup president on taking office. When the coup occurred last year, and myself, Dan Abbott, and Jeremy and others offered solidarity, we were attacked by the Tories. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab even accused Jeremy of putting Marxist solidarity ahead of democracy. We don't need such lectures on democracy. The Bolivian people don't need such lectures on democracy. Like so many people around the world, I'm absolutely delighted at the triumph of the left in the Bolivian elections, at the triumph of the people in the Bolivian elections. But we must beware of the very real threat. The elements of the establishment and elements of the right won't leave it there. We must beware, and I'm sure that they are vigilant in Bolivia for the emergence or re-emergence and further activities of fascist violent street gangs. And we must call for justice. Justice must take its course. We can't have a situation where there isn't justice for the victims of the violence of this coup, where there isn't justice for the victims of the oppression and brutality of this coup. The anti-democratic offences and the violent, murderous outrages must see justice done. So I'll finish on this. It's given a lot of people heart around the world. They say that defeat is inevitable. They say that the power of the establishment that is faced by people in Bolivia and elsewhere is too great ever to be defeated. The left in Bolivia has proven that wrong before. The left in Bolivia has proven that wrong again today. I believe there can be a similar victory in Ecuador in February. And I believe that we can learn the lessons of those who are fighting for a better world against huge odds and are inspiring us all by triumphing.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And no, it's great. And I just think it's a very, very important point that you made, that it's no accident that there is a clear and demonstrable link between neoliberalism and the poor COVID outcomes, not just in Latin America, but here in Britain, but in the United States, but across Latin America. This link shows itself with the dead lying on the streets in Ecuador and the disastrous policies being pursued by Bolsonaro in Brazil. So thanks once again, Richard. Okay, before I call on our next speaker, can I just say it's a bit of a technical thing, that if you want to, Patricia needs to be on the Spanish channel, and people who don't understand Spanish need to select the English channel on the interpretation button, which is on the bottom right of your panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So I hope I've got that right. I'm very, very pleased to be able to introduce Patricia Balivalian, sorry, who was a very senior person in Evo Morales' government. She was the former Minister for Economy and Development, and she's been, I think, in Argentina with Evo and has been working with Evo on the election campaign. So we're very pleased that she's been able to find the time in what must be a hugely busy period for her to speak to us this evening. So Patricia, over to you.
Muchas gracias. En realidad, sí, primero que nada, agradecerles a todos ustedes por toda la solidaridad, por todo el apoyo que nos han brindado durante este tiempo que ha sido muy difícil para nosotros. Y realmente hemos vivido un proceso en el cual jamás habíamos imaginado una ruptura, un quebrantamiento de nuestra democracia. Y yo sí estoy aquí en Argentina. Tuve que salir de mi país el 16 de diciembre junto con mis hijas. para refugiarme acá en Argentina. País que debo agradecer por todo el apoyo y la contención que han tenido con nosotros. Estamos hoy un día de fiesta, hoy realmente agradecer a mi pueblo boliviano, que una vez más nos ha dado una lección de democracia y perseverancia. Hemos resistido la peor opresión de un gobierno de facto y hemos triunfado en las urnas. El golpe de Estado que hemos vivido el año pasado, cuando todos los bolivianos habíamos ido también a votar y todos habíamos votado por el movimiento al socialismo que encabezaba nuestro presidente Evo. Nos inventaron un fraude con la complicidad de la OEA. Ustedes saben muy bien quién emitió un informe de supuestas irregularidades que nunca las hubo. El daño que ha ocasionado ese informe falso ha sido devastador en lo político, en lo social, en lo económico. Han quebrantado todo nuestro gobierno y el ordenamiento. La aprehensión de nuestras autoridades y nos han dejado sin el derecho de refutar, de defender o revisar un supuesto informe. Tras ese supuesto informe, toda una máquina de derecha agarró el poder, las oligarquías agarraron el poder y tuvimos mucha persecución. Ustedes saben muy bien los informes que hay referente a toda la vulneración de los derechos humanos. Más de 30 muertos, centenares de heridos, persecuciones políticas, acoso, represión militar, detenidos y torturados. Eso ya lo han relatado muchos organismos, como los informes de la ONU, de la Human Rights, también de Harvard. Y frente a eso, además de habernos vulnerado los derechos y haber cometido unos crímenes terriblemente fatales, de lesa humanidad, administraron de la peor manera nuestra economía. Hoy Bolivia no es la Bolivia del 2019. Una administración en la cual realmente han deteriorado todo nuestro aparato económico, han hecho cosas fuera de la norma, alta corrupción, y sumada a esa la pandemia, realmente momentos muy duros por los que ha pasado mi país. Es difícil entender por qué frente a tanto trabajo, haber levantado en 14 años nuestro presidente Evo Morales, haber liderizado por 6 años consecutivos el mayor crecimiento de la economía en la región, nosotros puntales de la economía. Haber logrado indicadores como es una tasa de desempleo más baja de América del Sur, inversión pública que ha superado las expectativas y que nunca ha habido en los 100 años de gobiernos anteriores. ¿Cómo hemos podido sacar de la pobreza a más de 1.800.000 bolivianos? Un trabajo que realmente ha sido elogiado por los diferentes organismos internacionales. Y frente a eso, obviamente, un golpe de Estado que ha venido con una fuerza tremenda y justamente a querer apropiarse de nuestros recursos. como bien decían los anteriores panelistas, en Bolivia lo que ha surgido durante el gobierno del presidente Evo Morales ha sido un buen desempeño en lo económico, en lo social y en lo político. Un desempeño además que nos ha ayudado a construir una Bolivia mejor, una Bolivia más unida, una Bolivia que tenía un proceso de cambio en curso importante y que, bueno, aquellos de derecha, aquellas oligarquías, aquellos intereses empresariales han hecho un golpe de Estado y eso lo conocen muy bien y eso es lo que ha pasado. Pero hemos recuperado la democracia. El pueblo ha ido a las urnas, ha votado en un proceso electoral donde ha habido un apoyo muy grande de la cooperación internacional, de todos los veedores internacionales. Ustedes saben muy bien que el proceso además no ha sido muy regular. 5 días antes de las elecciones nos informan que no iban a publicarse las actas en un conteo rápido, en un sistema de conteo rápido que en Bolivia existía. El sábado de la noche, un día antes de las elecciones, han sacado el sistema. Ayer hemos estado por más de 4 horas sin saber cuál era la tendencia, sin tener datos, sin que se les permita a las encuestadoras divulgar los datos de boca de urna. Hemos estado asustados porque en el proceso mismo de tanta vulneración a lo que normalmente se tenía en un proceso electoral, nos asustaba. Pero el pueblo ha triunfado, la democracia ha triunfado, Bolivia se encamina nuevamente a tener un proceso de reconstrucción, un proceso de reconstrucción en todo sentido, económico, social, político. Y agradecemos a todos ustedes por el acompañamiento, por haber estado ayudándonos con la voz, porque a muchos nos quedamos sin voz, nos quedamos sin decir, sin poder además presentar cualquier tipo de defensa frente a las acusaciones que se nos han hecho. Y bueno, hoy es un día feliz, hoy es un día que recuperamos la democracia y me alegra mucho estar en este foro, que se me haya invitado y simplemente agradecerles. Creo que aquí había un resumen de todo lo que se ha manifestado en el proceso mismo de lo que hemos vivido estos 11 meses y decir que hay que continuar en la lucha. Esto, yo digo, no hay que cambiar la pregunta, es ¿para qué nos ha pasado esto? No por qué nos ha pasado esto. ¿Para qué ha pasado esto? Tenemos que comenzar a realmente entender que hay procesos que debemos cuidar y que debemos tratar de hacerlos más intensos, más profundos. Esto viene ya en un proceso de reflexión en el cual tenemos que apostar por una democracia siempre y por entender que en Bolivia la derecha es un círculo que piensa que Bolivia es el entorno que ellos tienen. Ellos tienen que entender que Bolivia es diferente y que Bolivia está constituida por gente de clase popular, por gente que apuesta a una Bolivia en un proceso de cambio liderizado por el MAS. Eso por mi parte, muchas gracias por la invitación, muchas gracias por todo lo que han estado expresando y por estar tan solidariamente con nosotros. Gracias.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia. And I'd say that the social and trade union movements here in the UK are, of course, honoured that you have found the time to speak to us this evening. I mean, we send to you personally, to President-elect Luis Echa and to Evo Morales and the whole of the MAS Party, our solidarity. We will give you what support we can and as much solidarity as we can from across Britain and Europe. So solidarity to you and to the MAS and to the Latin American left and popular movements. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, before our final speaker, Jeremy Corbyn MP, I'd just like to thank everyone who has spoken so far, everyone who has tuned in, and in particular our comrades in Bolivia for their heroic struggle in showing another world is possible and that we can keep fighting and defeat US imperialism. At the Stop the War fringe meeting at last year's Labour Party conference, I made the point that the war for resources may well take the form of coup d'etat. I was speaking particularly about Bolivia and the coup that was a month in coming. The key question there was, on whose terms will Bolivia's lithium reserves be exploited? The Bolivian people or the global elite? Yesterday's vote is a very clear signal from the people of Bolivia which way they want that question answered. So please support Friends of Bolivia by donating or following on social media, and please keep up your vocal international solidarity with all those struggling for democracy, social progress, and self-determination in Bolivia. Friends and comrades, I now call on Jeremy Corbyn to speak and to close the meeting. Thank you very much. Jeremy.
Buenas tardes, Bolivia. Felicidades al presidente Luis Arce. Buenas tardes y felicidades y mi amigo Evo Morales. Y muchísimas gracias, Patricia, para su discurso muy excelente. Es un día excelente para el pueblo de Bolivia. Ahora un poquito en inglés. Adrian, thank you for what you said, and thank you everyone for being on this call this evening. I want to express my congratulations to MAS, to Evo, and to Luis for the incredible election result they achieved yesterday against all the abuse of all the world's mainstream media, against all the attacks they've suffered, against the way in which lawfare was used against Evo to drive him out of the country. And thank you very much to President López Obrador of Mexico for giving him somewhere safe to go, and then later to Argentina. And hopefully it won't be too long before Evo is able to go back to Bolivia. I first went to Bolivia as a very young man, very young, in 1969. And I was struck by its beauty. I was disturbed by its poverty, but I was impressed by its diversity, its linguistic diversity, and the way in which the pre-Hispanic cultures have remained so strong in Bolivia. But I also observed, even then, the degree of racism in the society and the degree of discrimination against people that spoke Quechua or any of the other languages compared to the European people who spoke only Spanish. And anyone who's read any of the history of Bolivia, of the brutality of the colonial occupation, of the exploitation of one piece of Bolivia's natural resources after another, the silver that came from Bolivia, that made so many so wealthy in colonial era Spain, for example. And so the campaign against privatization, the campaign for land reform, the campaign for the coca growers, the campaign to stop the water supply in Cochabamba being handed over to private companies led to eventually the election of Evo and of Mas into government. And I was very impressed with the figures and the information that my good friend Richard Burgon gave to us. The way in which that government has managed to lift the poorest out of poverty, to make sure this generation's natural resources, namely the gas and the lithium, are used for the benefit of all of the people. And I was later able to lead a British parliamentary delegation to Bolivia. And we studied the constitutional changes, the role of women in society, the understanding of the cultural diversity of the country, and of the environmental pressures that Bolivia is facing. Global warming has a devastating effect on water supply in Bolivia, because if there's no snow on the mountains, eventually the rivers don't flow. Eventually the water goes. And the effect that has on agriculture and farming all across Bolivia. Bolivia had, and now will have again, a government that was dedicated towards environmental sustainability and at the same time, equality for all the people of the country of Bolivia. And I think the way in which Evo and his government were removed, and the way in which people all over Bolivia, from the Amazon to the Altiplano to the borders with Chile and Argentina, have come together to defeat those that wanted to return to the old ways of the wealthy controlling the resources and the poor working for low wages to try and develop those resources. So I am so happy, and I'm so happy to be able to send my congratulations to all those that have brought about this historic victory. I had a very long conversation with Evo when we were in Mexico together for the inauguration of AMLO. And he talked about the pressures and the challenges. The pressures to get money to invest, the pressures to try to share resources and improve the lot of the very poorest people in society. And the pressures to bring in an education system that recognizes the real history of Bolivia and of Latin America as a whole. And the way in which the successive governments of the United States have treated the people of Bolivia. Evo was later removed from office, but I hope will soon be returning to his beloved country. And our job, surely, is to recognize the way in which they fought back and the way in which Mas has won the election by education, by action, and by principle. By the principle of standing up for democracy and a peaceful election, and thank goodness it was largely a peaceful election. And to give people that sense of hope and that understanding. Because the corona crisis around the world, the environmental crisis around the world, the economic crisis around the world has shown us that we cannot go on any longer with the old ways of redistribution of power and wealth from the poorest to the richest, and call it economic progress. Economic progress is when nobody has to sleep on the streets. Economic progress is when no child goes hungry. Economic progress is when every child gets education. Economic progress is when every older person that needs help and care and support gets that help and care and support. And economic progress is protecting our natural world and our environment for the next generation. I am so proud of those that have fought so hard in Bolivia to achieve all of these things. And I look forward to visiting Bolivia as soon as we're able to congratulate them in person, but also say to all of us on this call, let's be happy today, but let's not forget them tomorrow, because In Latin America, there is a history of the richest and most powerful waiting to take their revenge against those that represent the poorest and powerless when they try to gain political power. We've seen what happened in the past in Chile, in Argentina, and so many other countries. Let's support the people of Bolivia in their quest for their place in this world to live in justice. And that voice of Bolivia will be so powerful in the world's councils to bring about that sustainable, decent, fair, peaceful world based on human rights, peace, democracy, and justice. It doesn't sound very extreme, but those of us that believe in that, we're labeled as desperate extremists. Okay, I extremely strongly believe in peace, justice, human rights, and democracy. Well done, the people of Bolivia. Well done, Presidente Luis Arce hoy día. Muchísimas gracias a todos.